behold, in December, on the 2nd and 3rd of December, the World Health Organization hosted the Global Vaccine Safety Summit. This was also a 20-year anniversary for the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety. This was all of the heads, the world leaders on vaccine science and safety gathered together in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, they were there to talk about vaccine safety. And I imagine, since the science is settled, it probably should have been a really short and boring conversation, you would think. Luckily for us, they forgot that there were cameras in the room. First of all, let's remember the World Health Organization, which has said that the greatest threat to health, or one of the greatest threats to health, is vaccine hesitancy. We've seen their mantra in every single person like Sweeney, totally misinformed, and news anchors and science professionals and doctors saying it over and over and over again as though repetition would make us believe it. Here's what the World Health Organization has been telling every spokeshole on the planet to tell us. Take a listen to this one more time.
Measles vaccine is incredibly safe. It is incredibly effective.
This is a safe and effective vaccine.
Vaccines are safe and effective.
Vaccines are safe and effective.
Safe and effective.
Safe, that they're effective.
Safe and effective.
Safe and effective.
Vaccines are safe and efficacious.
Vaccines are safe.
It's completely safe.
Is a safe and highly effective.
Vaccines are safe. The MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella, is a safe vaccine.
100% effective and 100% safe. They're very effective and they're very safe.
We know that vaccines don't cause autism.
Vaccines do not cause autism. Vaccines are safe.
It's as simple as that.
So what I want to start this presentation out with was a presentation made by Dr. Heidi Larson. She's an anthropologist that works with the, what's it called? Vaccine Confidence Project. The Vaccine Confidence Project, she's the director. So she's been investigating the confidence around vaccines. This is Dr. Heidi Larson speaking to all of the scientists in Geneva, Switzerland about vaccine confidence.
You've seen a lot of news about the growing questioning environment, but what I'm trying to look at here is where does safety come up in the broader look at where the confidence problem is. And again, safety rises to the top. This was in the US. I've done a lot in Europe. This was our first, we developed a vaccine confidence index, which we've been running for 5 years. Have under review now an analysis of 250,000 people in 148 countries. We have all their background demographics and to look at what are the trends and patterns, but this is one of the first ones we did, 67 countries in 2016, and I was actually surprised at Europe being so acutely skeptical when it came to safety. I knew other countries were having some issues, but it was quite acute in Europe. When we try to disaggregate that by different kinds of reasons, safety is the biggest issue. Safety is the biggest issue. Fear of side effects, low sense of risk.
Here she's saying safety. Look at these graphs because it's really, you can see why she's shocked. When you look at one of the reasons you lack vaccine confidence, look at that line, 31. I mean, it's almost triple any other argument they have about vaccines. Safety is what people reacted to. Here again, fear of side effects, a low risk of contracting the disease. I mean, that was one of the things they said, and that they didn't believe the disease was that severe. They were more worried about the side effects. In everything I saw here, what I'm going to show you today is extremely shocking, but not necessarily surprising to me, except this one point right now. I'm going to show you something that blew me away because I did not know that this was true.
The other thing that's a trend and an issue is not just confidence in providers, but confidence of healthcare providers. We have a very wobbly health professional front line that is starting to question vaccines and the safety of vaccines. That's a huge problem because to this day, any study I've seen, and we're constantly looking on any studies in this space, still the most trusted person on any study I've seen globally is the healthcare provider. And if we lose that, we're in trouble.
Listen to what she's saying. Not only is it people that you have been affecting by sharing your stories and sharing the Highwire and walking in and showing people like the vaccine safety white paper saying, well, read this. Many of you were handing this to your doctors. Many of you are questioning your doctors, asking very, very reasonable questions that they can't answer. Listen to what she's saying. The front line, their soldiers for this issue are the doctors. Everybody looks up to, she says, to the doctors. That's the #1 person that people believe in, but that person is becoming wobbly. That person, we are all shocked to find, including her, but especially me, that they are starting to question vaccines themselves. The doctors themselves are questioning the vaccines. But what's really amazing is when she starts to drill in on why would the doctors be lacking this confidence and what are we going to have to do about it, listen to what she admits.
We've talked about it earlier. Some of the challenges are when the frontline professionals are starting to question, or they don't feel like they have enough confidence about the safety to stand up to it to the person asking them the questions. I mean, most medical school curriculums, even nursing curriculums, I mean, in medical school, you're lucky if you have a half day on vaccines, never mind keeping up to date with all this.
What? Wait a minute. I thought Dell was exaggerating. I thought he was spreading misinformation when he said that doctors are barely trained at all in vaccines. I've told you, it's like a paragraph. You're lucky if it's a day. She said, listen to what she said. This is the head investigator looking at vaccine safety, why it's an issue, why are doctors wobbling? Because she says to the whole room. Nobody said, boo, hiss, that's not true. They all nodded as she said, as we know, doctors and even nurses are lucky if they get a half day of education on vaccination. Out of 8 years, we're lucky if they get a half a day of education. And others, people saying, I don't think it matters. They don't just have to know the ingredients. They study all the other things. They know about vaccines. You know, they don't have to be able to list the ingredients. Really? It's not just the ingredients. Listen what she just said. Half a day on vaccines, unequivocally. I don't have to ever say it again. From now on, I'm going to play that video from the World Health Organization. Now, this is what they have to say about our misinformation.
I spend a lot of time talking, particularly in the last 6 months, with tech companies, Facebook, WhatsApp, Pulsar, Twitter, Instagram, WeChat, Weibo. They have a lot of fingers pointing at them to fix the misinformation problem. But it's not so simple. One, the biggest problem is a lot of it's not misinformation. Our problem is, as we've heard in the last 48 hours, that there's not anything 100%. And what actually can legally, without creating a censorship thing, can we absolutely say this is misinformation? Because we have a lot of ambiguity in the safety field, and we have to come to terms with that. So we have to think about it differently than deleting misinformation, but building trust so people are willing to put up with a certain amount of risk because they believe in it enough. They believe in our work, what we're doing, and that it's in their interest.
I'm speechless. I mean, I think you should be speechless right now. These are the people that are writing the mandates. They oversee the AMA, everybody. This is the World Health Organization. These are the world scientists. This is the woman looking into it. What she's saying is, look, we all have to admit that our biggest problem is these things that are being said in these blogs and these posts online. It's not actually misinformation. As every even though we've told CNN to call it misinformation, even though we told the Washington Post and the New York Times to call it misinformation, here inside this room where we forgot the cameras are rolling, we all know deep down it's not misinformation. It's true. They found our weakness. We have a real problem now, and we're losing the people. Somehow they're getting this information. Somehow this problem is growing. You now listen to one of the top scientists looking at this in the world, and watch all the heads nod as she basically says the Highwire was right. Take a look.
I think that one of our biggest challenges is, as Bob said this morning or yesterday, we're in a unique position in human history where we've shifted the human population to vaccine-induced, to dependency on vaccine-induced immunity. And that's on the great assumption that populations would cooperate. And for many years, people lined up. The 6 vaccines, people were there. They saw the reason. We're in a very fragile state now. We have developed a world that is dependent on vaccinations. We don't have a choice but to make that effort.
Did you vote on that? I don't remember. I don't remember a ballot saying, I want to vote and leave natural immunity that where no one's dying and I get lifelong immunity. I want to leave that and go to an inferior, immunity system that keeps wearing off, and then find ourselves that, oh my God, all of a sudden, we're losing it. People all had to enroll. Yeah, when we did 6 vaccines, everyone was down, but now it's like 53 vaccines. It's getting harder and harder to sell it. And now with 270 vaccines in the pipeline, how are we going to get people to believe in that? Because that's what we're going to have to do. Nature was giving you immunity, and it actually affected your health all the way around. As you saw in that montage, scientists, top doctors saying if you got some of these diseases, you wouldn't get these other diseases. That it had, massive protection that we took away. Now we're going to try and pinpoint and do what nature was doing so perfectly. Did you vote to step out and try and mess with nature? Did you vote and say, yeah, let's all get on this ship? No, you didn't. You didn't know this was happening. You didn't know that they were wiping out natural immunity while they tried to make billions of dollars off of us. And now they find themselves in a problem because people are starting to doubt we're losing them. If we lose them, we're really in trouble. We really messed this up. Now, it might be okay. Maybe you're saying, well, Dal, it's okay. We're all on this vaccine program. We can't go back. There's no going back. And by the way, if vaccines are safe, what difference does it make? If the vaccine safety study is being done, then all she's saying is we've just got to show people that vaccine safety and we'll bring them back. Take a look what she says about the vaccine safety science that we all thought was done when they were putting us on the ship to destroy natural immunity and put us on a pharmacological, constant injection-basis society, world society. This is what she says about the safety that made them confident about that.
There's a lot of safety science that's needed. And without the good science, we can't have good communication. So although I'm talking about all these other contextual issues and communication issues, it absolutely needs the science as the backbone. You can't repurpose the same old science to make it sound better if you don't have the science that's relevant to the new problems. So we need much more investment in safety science.
I thought the science was settled. I thought this had all been done. You're saying we can't be like refurbishing old science that doesn't even deal with the question at hand, that isn't even addressing the problem? You would think I said this. You would think we hired someone to go in and say this in front of this room. This woman's being paid. She's in the Vaccine Confidence Project designed by the World Health Organization. She's looked into this, and what she's telling you is, we really need to do some safety science, because the only way I can teach you and come up with talking points to win people back is I got to be able to do what Del Bightri's doing. I got to be able to put out science and say, look, here's the science, here's the proof. But we can't because we haven't done it. We got like old science from a vaccine we're not even using anymore. We're trying to say, look at this old Volkswagen Bug that doesn't have airbags. It gives you all of the confidence you should have in our brand new Cadillac. It just doesn't work that way. The world doesn't work that way. Incredible admissions. Now, you may be saying, well, it's just her. I'm about to show you multiple scientists now that are going to begin the discussion. Of course, she's looking at the confidence around safety. She just told you she doesn't think that the safety studies are there. What do the other top scientists at the World Health Organization and other groups that are looking into this, what do they think about the safety? Here, you know what? Marion Gruber, Director, Office of Vaccine Research and Review, Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the FDA. Take a look at this.
My name is Marion Gruber. I'm with the Office of Vaccines at the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, US Food and Drug Administration. And as I was reading the paper that I was part of writing, I would like to sort of underscore a few points made in that paper and also reflect on some of the issues presented to us regarding novel vaccine platforms. So I think vaccines, regardless whether they are generated using new and innovative technology or whether more standard conventional technologies are applied, they do require safety surveillance and monitoring that is specifically tailored to the vaccine that is under consideration using available pharmacovigilance systems. So in other words, the risk management plan for each particular vaccine will need to take into the consideration the pre-licensure safety database, potential safety signals that may have been identified during pre-licensure clinical safety trials, other perhaps even theoretical safety concerns, and also need to take into consideration the disease to be prevented, the target population, and the proposed indication in order to really inform risk management.
Risk management. You know what we will need to do to work better at risk management, to establish safety? You know what we will need to do? Hold on a second. I mean, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying to me. I don't even revel in the fact that we've been right. Think about what she's saying. I thought this was a discussion. Didn't we all think this was a discussion that happened like 100 years ago before they were giving us like 11 vaccines at a time that they said, you know what we will need to do? We'll need to track how safe these are in people. Yeah, we'll look at the clinical data that was done by the manufacturer, which we all know you can't really trust. But seriously, we're going to have systems. We're going to have the things in place so that we can track the risk management plan. And it's going to have to be specific to each vaccine. We will need to do that. All right, that video would have been cool, you know, in 1920. It would have been really, really cool in like 1961 before they released the MMR vaccine in 1962 and 3 that essentially led us to this place that's just been described as a world dependent on vaccines. Before that happened, we'll put these safety things in place would have been really great. But to be hearing about it in 2019, on the eve of 2020, as people are marching in New Jersey saying, you are not going to take away my religious right to opt out of this vaccine program, and Del Bigtree is screaming his lungs out saying they've never done a safety study, to find out that while we're there doing that the World Health Organization is sitting down and saying, you know what we will need to do to make vaccines safe? Put in some safety measures that we never did before. That's scary. So one of the things that we always hear when we talk about vaccines, I've said it before, Sanjay Gupta will say, they say that vaccines are more toxic, but the truth is there's less antigens in vaccines than have ever been in the vaccine program. And your child digs through thousands of antigens every day. That's the straw man argument. That's not an argument I don't know anyone that's made that argument in our movement. We've never said there's too many antigens in the vaccine. We said it's the adjuvants in the vaccine, the toxic chemicals that incite the body into an allergic reaction, essentially, that hyperactivate the immune system. That's what we're really concerned about. Well, listen to a man whose specialty appears to be adjuvants. This is Dr. Martin Howell Friede, Coordinator Initiative for Vaccine Research at the WHO. Let's get into adjuvants, shall we?
I'll just say a few words about adjuvants. So adjuvants are added to vaccines for many reasons, but primarily to make the vaccines work. And as we enter the next decade, and we're trying to make vaccines against malaria, TB, HIV, GBS, RSV, it is extremely likely that these are going to require adjuvants. And yet, every time we add an adjuvant to a vaccine, the people that are using the vaccine look at it, and if there's an adverse event, we know what they're going to say. It's the adjuvant that caused that adverse event. And we've seen clinical studies in the past where a single adverse event has been blamed on the adjuvant in the development trials, and things come to a standstill while we go in and spend many years trying to investigate, is the theoretical immunostimulation induced by that adjuvant responsible for the adverse event? Now, over the years of GACS, over the last 15 years, we've seen many accusations. I'm going to begin off with aluminium. So this was accused of causing macrophagic myofasciitis. And yet, this complex word typically only occurs many years after potential administration of the aluminium. And as we go forwards with the immunostimulators like MPL, like the saponins, we are likely to see every time that there is an association, be it temporal or not temporal, the first accusation is it is the adjuvant. And yet, without adjuvants, we are not going to have the next generation of vaccines. And many of the vaccines that we do have, ranging from tetanus through to HPV, require adjuvants in order for them to work. So the challenge that we have in front of us is, how do we build confidence in this? And the confidence, first of all, comes from the regulatory agencies. I look to Marion. When we add an adjuvant, it's because it is essential. We do not add adjuvants to vaccines because we want to do so. But when we add them, it adds to the complexity. And I give courses every year on how do you develop vaccines, how do you make vaccines. And the first lesson is, while you're making your vaccine, if you can avoid using an adjuvant, please do so. Lesson 2 is, if you're going to use an adjuvant, use one that has a history of safety. And lesson 3 is, if you're not going to do that, think very carefully.
I mean, listen to what he just said. This is one of the discussions, I get asked this all the time. You know, there's been, Green My Vaccine was one of the things that Jenny McCarthy was, trying to create. And people say to me, what if vaccines were safe? And I've said, I don't know that they can be safe. I don't know that you can do it because you can't make many of these vaccines, as he just said, without an adjuvant. And he said every time we add an adjuvant, it adds to the complexity. And as we've pointed out, they don't just test adjuvants by themselves. They can't. They're not allowed to. They can't just inject someone with aluminum and then inject someone else with saline and say, let's see how they do over the next year or 2 or 3 and see if they develop an autoimmune disease, which, as J.B. Hanley said very eloquently in the rollout we had at the beginning of the show, I think we've shown that adjuvants, that these things are causing autoimmune disease. I think the science is settled there, and he's right. We've looked at the aluminum studies in mice and rats. We've watched Dr. Christopher Exley, dissect, the brains of Alzheimer's patients and the brains of autistic children and seen that they're extreme, highest levels of aluminum we've ever seen. How is the aluminum getting there? In fact, that's the studies going on right now in Chris Exley's group in the UK. They're starting to figure out ways to track the aluminum to see how is it traveling from the injection and getting up into the brain. Of course, Roman Girardi and the is done all the work in the autoimmune disease and what's happening when we're injecting aluminum. And so this guy's telling you, listen to what he said, because you really have to think about this. If you're praying that there's going to be a safe vaccine, he says, we don't put adjuvants there because we want to. It's kind of menacing sounding, isn't it? Like, we know it's dangerous to do it. We wouldn't do it if we didn't have to. We're not fools. We just have no choice. We've got to put this dangerous element into vaccines that add to the complexity because it's the only way we've ever been able to figure out how to make them work in many of these vaccines. So in my class, when someone's saying, I want to make vaccines, he says, then I have 3 rules. If you can make one without an adjuvant, do it. If you have to use an adjuvant, try to use one that we've used before that they won't blame for the dangers and harms that are going on. If you're going to use a new adjuvant, think very carefully. Obviously, this conversation sparks the mind in any intelligent person. But there was a doctor in the room that I think asked the obvious next question, the one that we've asked probably 1 million times here on the Highwire when we were supposedly spreading misinformation. Listen to what Dr. Stephen Evans, professor of pharmaco-epidemiology, asks about this element that you have to put in vaccines.
It seems to me that adjuvants multiply the immunogenicity of the antigens that they are added to, and that is their intention. It seems to me they multiply the reactogenicity in many instances, and therefore it seems to me that it is not unexpected if they multiply the incidence of adverse reactions that are associated with the antigen, but may not have been detected through lack of statistical power in the original studies. Now, I wonder if this thinking is correct, and if it is, whether this has some implications for the way we do pharmacovigilance. Because one vaccine that has one antigen and an adjuvant, and another vaccine that has a different antigen and no adjuvant, the reason for the difference is not immediately obvious.
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? If this adjuvant ramps, up the power of the antigen, then it can ramp up anything else that it comes in contact with in the body, can it not? And what about another vaccine that didn't need the adjuvant, but that maybe is, I think he's saying, is given at the same time? What happens with that antigen? I mean, it is possible that it could ramp up the amount of autoimmune disease and reactions in the future, could it not? I mean, if we're really messing with the system, and this is why you're saying we shouldn't put one in if we don't have to, right? I mean, these are great questions, but, Dr. Stephen Evans, where was this question 50 years ago before we were all put on this airplane we were still building and saying, these adjuvants, these multiple adjuvants we're using, is it possible that they could ramp up the immune system in a way we do not want? Listen to the response.
So with the local reactogenicity, you are correct. As we add adjuvants, especially some of the more recent adjuvants, such as the AS01 sapinin-derived adjuvants, we do see increased local reactogenicity. The primary concern, though, usually is systemic adverse events rather than local adverse events. And we tend to get in the phase 2 and the phase 3 studies quite good data on the local reactogenicity. Those of us in this room that are beyond the age of 50 who've had the pleasure of having the recent shingles vaccine will know that this does have quite significant local reactogenicity. If you got the vaccine, you know that you got the vaccine. But this is not the major health concern. The major health concern which we are seeing are accusations of long-term effects. So what we have to bear in mind is that we don't use adjuvants by themselves. The adjuvant is used in combination with an antigen. And an adjuvant may give quite different responses depending on which antigen it is combined with. So the fact that an adjuvant is shown to be safe with one antigen might give a different response with another antigen because of other things that are with that second antigen, including impurities. So to come back to this, I'm going to once again point to the regulators. It comes down to ensuring that we conduct the phase 2 and the phase 3 studies with adequate size and with appropriate measurement.
It'd be really good if we could do these early trials with the appropriate size and the adequate measurement, which clearly we have not done, because listen to what he said. The way we're testing them right now, the way our studies are set up, we're really good at discovering whether or not your arm hurts like hell after getting a shingles vaccine. Giggle, giggle, giggle through the room, which we all know because we got it. I mean, that's how good their science is. That we're really good at figuring out. Did that hurt? Yeah, it really hurts. Still hurts. All right, mark it down. Local reaction, adverse event and local reaction. We're good at doing that. Studies can achieve that. Our problem is we absolutely suck at being able to figure out if there's systemic adverse events. That's what he said. Systemic, meaning your body is screwed. You're going to start developing autoimmune diseases 2 and 3 years down the road. We have no way we have not ever designed a trial that could track that. And by the way, that's exactly what Dr. Chris Exley and Dr. Roman Girardi and Dr. Zebin Yao and Dr. Christopher Shaw and many others, Yehuda Schoenfeld and around the world, they're doing this work after the vaccines are in the population, and they're being attacked by the World Health Organization. They're being attacked by the medical community saying, you're anti-vaxxers for even asking the question, and this guy's telling you, somebody better ask this question. Somebody better figure out a way to study it, because we are flying blind. We don't know what we're doing, and this guy that just asked this question is right. Yes, adjuvants are probably really capable of creating systemic adverse reactions and might really be the cause of our rise from 12.8% chronic systemic adverse reactions in our children in the 1980s when they got 11 vaccines to now 54% of our children having adverse reactions. Those studies really should have been done before we did this to our children. But as you're hearing, they haven't figured out how to do that. You want to hear something even scarier? Not only have they not figured out how to track and do a study that can see if there's going to be a systemic problem in the future, what if they don't even know how an adjuvant works?
Doing surveillance is necessary, but understanding how these things work is also necessary so that we can assess plausibility.
So in our clinical trials, we are actually using relatively small sample sizes. And when we do that, we're at risk of tyranny of small numbers, which is you just need a single case of Wegener's granulomatosis, and your vaccine has to solve Walt's. How do you prove a null hypothesis? And it takes years and years to try to figure that out. So it's a real conundrum, right? Getting the right size, dealing with the tyranny of small numbers, making sure that you can really do it. And so I think one of the things that we really need to invest in are kind of better biomarkers, better mechanistic understanding of how these things work so we can better understand adverse events as they come up.
One of the additional issues that complicates safety evaluation is if you look at and you struggle with the length of follow-up that should be adequate in a, let's say, pre-licensure or even post-marketing study, if that's even possible. Because, I mean, one has to acknowledge the longer you follow up, the more you perhaps see adverse events that have nothing to do with the adjuvant vaccine combination, but maybe, again, coincidental. But the problem is, you know, how do you deal with that data? And again, as you mentioned, pre-licensure clinical trials may not be powered enough. It's also the subject population that you administer the adjuvant to, because we've seen data presented to us where an adjuvant, a particular adjuvant added to a vaccine antigen did really nothing when administered to a certain population, and it's usually the elderly, you know, compared to administering the same formulation to younger age strata. So these are things which need to be considered as well and further complicate safety and effectiveness evaluation of adjuvants combined with vaccine antigens.
Graders. Who put these third graders in charge of world health? Listen to the things she's saying. I wrote some of this down. First of all, you know, two scientists both say the same thing. It'd be really nice to know how an adjuvant works, how these adjuvant works. We need to figure out a way to do some sort of studies so that we can understand why it's doing what we're seeing it do. I mean, remember, this is supposed to be settled science. This is so far from settled science, it's absolutely shocking. So David Kaslow says, I'd like to know. Yeah, Martin, I would like to know too. That'd be really great. Let's have a party on how many people would love to know how an adjuvant works. And then you go over to Gruber, and she starts saying things like, you know, the trials just really aren't powered enough to track systemic reactions and adjuvants. And, you know, and he said, I love the tyranny of small numbers. We're suffering from the tyranny of small numbers in these studies. Folks, I'm not saying this. Bobby Kennedy's not sitting on a microphone and saying what we're suffering from is the tyranny of small numbers. It's the scientific community, literally the heads of the scientific world are saying we have a tyranny of small numbers. And let me explain that. See, these people are so brainwashed in the fact that we got to have vaccines. So the problem Kaslow has is when you do see an adverse event show up. You know what really sucks is when a kid dies in the middle of a trial, because now you got to stop everything down. And even though it might have been like a 1 in 1,000 problem, we only had 100 kids. And since it happened in 1 in 100, how do you prove the null hypothesis? How do you prove that it's only 1 in 100? Or you know, when it could be 1 in 1,000? You know, this is the problem. When we see a problem, it's really problematic for us. And then Marion Gruber kind of jumps in and says, yeah, I mean, it's one of the issues we have with having a long-term study is what if something happens, then we have to prove that it wasn't the vaccine, and there's a chance it wasn't the vaccine. And so you see in their minds, they go, that's why these things have to be so short. I mean, we really got to keep them short because we don't want to be investigating issues that pop up when you have like 1,000 kids in a study versus 100. We don't want to see those problems. We don't want to see the problems that would show up if they get like a systemic autoimmune disease because we saw it because we actually did the study for 3 years, even though she says our problem is length of follow-up. Now remember, I've said it over and over again. Every drug you're taking, for the most part, went through a 5 to 6 year safety trial. And she's saying we have a problem with the length of follow-up. They're talking about adjuvants and saying the systemic autoimmune disease problem would be very, very difficult to discover, especially since these aluminum adjuvants and the issues with them don't come up for years until years down the road. So let me quickly remind you exactly what Marion Gruber is realizing is a problem. We looked into it. Here's how long the follow-up was on many of the childhood vaccines you're giving your children. Measles, 42 days, both solicited and unsolicited reactions. Chickenpox, 42 days. Hepatitis A, well, here's a bomber, 4 days and 5 days. And then they decided to make a phone call 31 days later, and then at 6 months to see how you're doing. Still not enough time to see an autoimmune reaction. 42 days. Hepatitis B, as we've said over and over again, 4 and 5 days total. Everyone seems to be doing fine, even though hepatitis B has massive amounts of aluminum and very well could lead to multiple sclerosis, as studies in France have found, and other issues like that. But our 4 to 5 day study, we're going to stick with that. 30 days total, even in the follow-up on Hib. DTaP, 28 days, 6 months, 3 days, 30 days, 60 days. Days, folks. Days. And what she said, we even give adjuvants to like grandparents, it works fine. But then that same adjuvant's in kids and it's a problem. And do you think they did studies on that? What are they doing? And when we change to a different antigen, when we put that aluminum adjuvant on a different vaccine, we're just making an assumption be fine, but the leading scientist in the world says you can't do that. The adjuvant works differently with every single different antigen it comes in contact with, including those that are already inside your body when you're injecting it. But what about a brand new group that they really want really bad? Listen to this.
Coming down the pike, maybe relatively quickly, is a new target population for us in vaccines, and that's maternal immunization. And these are women who are pregnant, who will have all kinds of adverse events associated with their pregnancy. Part of the problem is that we don't have a strong enough pharmaco-epidemiologic baseline in the target populations that we're studying to be able to say, is this an expected adverse event due to pregnancy, or is this related to the vaccine? So I do think an investment in that kind of epidemiologic baseline is going to be critically important if we don't want to derail some of our maternal immunization vaccines as they go into low resource settings.
I do think an investment into an understanding of what's going on with pregnant women would be very helpful as we want to continue to forcibly inject these things into pregnant women. Think about this. We know that an adjuvant works differently in a grandparent than a child, but what about a fetus? This guy, they're going in and they have no idea what they're doing. And when you go to Walmart or Walgreens, you see these posters up. Protection during pregnancy. It begins during pregnancy. Make sure to get your flu shot. Make sure to get your Tdap vaccine. CDC says it's really important. If you want to really protect your baby, and you didn't know that the World Health Organization, they're all sitting around saying, we don't have any idea how pregnancy works or what vaccines might do. Look what we saw them say. This is the guy at the CDC at the ACIP meetings that actually deals with the lawsuits against vaccines. That's an HRSA program underneath Health and Human Services. Listen to him describe what we should be telling people about the use of vaccines in pregnant women.
Dr. Sun.
Yeah, I just want to make a clarification on the use of vaccines in pregnancy. Unless there is a study of that vaccine in pregnant women, even though that age indication, may fall in within that age indication, it is still not considered. Use in pregnant women will still be considered off-label.
We're sitting there saying, wait a minute. Did one of the top officials at the CDC just say that use of vaccines in pregnant women is an off-label usage? Why would that be? And by the way, it would be illegal for a vaccine maker to put up a poster that says you should use this product knowing it's an off-label usage. Only a government agency could get away with that. So we sued the FDA. We started out with FOIA requests against the FDA and said, we'd like to see the trials. We left that meeting, we went and we started a lawsuit. We'd like to see the trials of Tdap vaccine and flu vaccine in pregnant women that determined when you put up posters saying you're doing the best thing for your baby by getting these vaccines, where are the trials that you did that said that would be safe? In a fetus, because we know an antigen is different in a grandparent now and a child. What about that fetus? They fought us, they pushed back. And this one we settled because they finally admitted. We said, we will settle this case and walk out of here if you admit. And what they said is, we can't find any information. We have no records responsive to your request. We cannot provide a single record of a trial that had a pregnant woman involved in it. And that's how these government agencies are working. Listen to this doctor from Nigeria asking arguably the most obvious question known to man.
As we were having the discussions, something was just going through my mind which I will need clarification. Outside vaccines, for instance, we take Septrin and Fancida, they potentiate each other. And there are so many other drugs like that. I cast back my mind to our situation in Nigeria, where at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 14 weeks, a child is being given different antigens from different companies. And these vaccines have different adjuvants, different preservatives, and so on. You go again to 9 months. Currently, the child at 9 months will receive MEN A. That same child will receive yellow fever. That same child will receive measles vaccine. Something crosses my mind. Is there a possibility of these adjuvants, preservatives, cross-reacting amongst themselves? Have there ever been a study on the possibility of cross-reactions from the panel members that you can share the experience with us? Because this is one thing that I'm also crossing my mind. Going back home, this is an area that we will need to work with the regulatory agency. Let's even see what is happening. Is there any possibility? So we need guidance from the panel members whether there's ever been any study on these cross-reactions of multiple antigens from different companies given to a child at the same time. What counsel do you have for us? Thank you.
This reminds me of a question that we've played many times that took place at the CDC, at the ACIP meetings, the obvious question. Multiple adjuvants and vaccines at the same time. This very intelligent doctor is thinking, you know, before I came in this room, I thought safety studies had been done. I thought you guys knew what you were doing. And as I sit here listening to this, I'm becoming more and more terrified, is what I think he's saying. It's becoming really obvious to me that you're doing something that I don't think you know anything about. Can someone on this panel please take away my fear? This is the moment that happened with a scientist asking a question at the ACIP. And this is what the CDC's recommendation was for questions like that. Just listen to this conversation.
Is there any comment on using this vaccine at the same time with other adjuvanted vaccines?
We have no data to make a recommendation one way or the other.
So just to sort of put this in context of other vaccines, whilst preclinical studies were not done using these vaccines simultaneously, our general approach to immunizations is that they can be given at the same time in different limbs.
You know, I was sitting on the edge of my seat when I heard Dr. Basiak Posen from Nigeria asking this question and I wonder if the same thing that the CDC recommends is what we're going to hear as an answer here. Well, Dr. Akposen, you know, no, we haven't done any studies on that, but don't worry, we know to give the vaccine in different limbs. Does he go home going, oh, great, thanks, that makes me feel a lot better? Is that what a scientist is going to say to another scientist? Different limbs solves the problem. Oh, my God. No. Here's the answer he gets.
This is a very important question because in general, the clinical trials with any particular new product frequently is done just by itself. And then ultimately, frequently the regulators will ask if that vaccine could be added to the routine immunization program. And so frequently a trial is done with that new vaccine in addition to the regular regimen. But your question is almost kind of the next step, because in real practice, frequently there are multiple vaccines from different manufacturers that then may be received at a different age schedules, etc. And if you take a look at the immunization schedule over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years in high-income countries, as well as in low-resource countries, the schedule has gotten more and more complex, clearly. And so if you take a look at the exposure, what we call the vaccine exposure, in the typical adverse event report to a spontaneous reporting system in any country, you'll see that increase in heterogeneity of those different vaccine exposures, especially if you take the manufacturer into account. Now, the only way to tease that out is if you had a large population database like the Vaccine Safety Data Link, as well as some of the other national databases that are coming to being, where the actual vaccine exposure is tracked down to that level of specificity of who is the manufacturer, what is the lot number, et cetera, et cetera. And there's initiative to try to make the vaccine label information barcoded so that it includes that level of information, so that in the future, when we do these type of studies, we're able to tease that out. And in order to as each time you subdivide, then the sample size gets becoming more and more challenging. And that's what I said earlier today about that we're really only in the beginning of the era of large data sets where hopefully you could start to harmonize the databases for multiple studies. And there's actually an initiative underway. Helen there may want to comment on it to try to get more national vaccine safety database linked together so we could start to answer these type of questions that you just raised.
That was a lot of words to get to the last point so that we can start to answer these types of questions you have just raised. Think about what he's saying. We went from 11 vaccines when we could sue them in the 1980s to 54 vaccines, 72 doses now that we can't. And what he's saying is, as you all know, when you're going for your well baby visits, as this guy said, 7, 8, 9 different vaccines at one time. There's no way now at this point to figure out how to tease this way out, to somehow isolate one of those vaccines, because we never did it one vaccine at a time. And we never did the studies we should have done when we were only giving 10 vaccines, where it might have been easier to figure out if all of these systemic problems and deaths and things are being caused by these vaccines. And now that it's like 54 and climbing and you're getting 10 at a time, how the heck are they going to be able to do it? And this is why, if someone else wants to chime in here. We're trying to harmonize all the databases around the world, first world nations and second world nations, so that we can start to figure out a way to answer the safety question. That the Institute of Medicine said this: studies designed to examine the long-term effects of the cumulative number of vaccines or other aspects of the immunization schedule have not been conducted. Existing research has not been designed to test the entire immunization schedule. No studies have ever compared the difference in health outcomes between entirely unimmunized populations of children and fully immunized children. Take a look at what, once again, they wanted to tell the world outside of this room. Take a look at this.
Vaccines are very safe. If someone gets sick after vaccination, it is usually either a coincidence, an error in administering the vaccine, or very rarely a problem with the vaccine itself. That's why we have vaccine safety systems. Robust vaccine safety systems allow health workers and experts to react immediately to any problems that may arise. They can examine the problem rigorously and scientifically, look at the data, and then promptly address the problem. WHO works closely with countries to make sure that vaccines can do what they do best: prevent disease without risks. New vaccines against malaria, meningitis, and encephalitis in Asia and Africa are now being thoroughly monitored with support from WHO. Vaccines are one of the safest tools we have to prevent disease and ensure a healthy future for all children.
All right. Obviously, 4 days before this event, you could maybe argue that's what the World Health Organization believed was true before they put all these scientists in a room. Maybe they never, ever talked to each other. Or I'm about to answer one of the biggest questions I've always had. And I get asked is, do they know? Or are they just being manipulated? Remember, so this is Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, MD. She is none other than the chief scientist at the World Health Organization, a pediatrician. They brought their #1 person and put her in front of a camera. And so you could ask yourself, are they just not showing her the data? Does she not understand it? Are they lying to her and putting her in front of this camera and she's just clueless? One might think that if you now have seen this entire event that I've just shown you, which obviously goes directly against everything she just said in that video. 4 days earlier, she's putting this video. Maybe she didn't know this conference was happening. Or what if she's at this conference? What did she say 4 days later at this event? If you have food in your mouth, swallow it now. Because this is the whole kit and caboodle.
I think we cannot overemphasize the fact that we really don't have very good safety monitoring systems in many countries, and this adds to the miscommunication and the misapprehensions because we're not able to give clear-cut answers when people ask questions about the deaths that have occurred due to particular vaccine, and this always gets blown up in the media. One should be able to give a very factual account of what exactly has happened and what the cause of deaths are. But in most cases, there's some obfuscation at that level, and therefore there's less and less trust then in the system. Putting in place the mechanisms, whether they're cohort studies or whether they're sentinel surveillance sites, to be able to monitor what's going on and report back, and then for corrective action to be taken, because unexpected things could arise after introduction, and one always has to be prepared. As we've seen, in the history of many drugs, you've learned about adverse events only after the drug's been licensed and introduced into the population. So I think that risk is always there, and the population needs to understand that and feel confident that mechanisms are being put in place to study some of those things.
If you're out there watching, am I allowed to say that this woman is lying? Can we say it? I mean, am I allowed to? She just ended by saying, we know that there's adverse events, that we don't have the tracking system. She starts out by saying, we all have to admit here that we don't have any surveillance systems for safety really in place in most of these countries. And we know that people are going to be injured. And she even says, we have to be honest with the people that there are going to be injuries, that is a part of this process as we go forward. 4 days after she just did a video saying it's the safest thing we do, you should absolutely believe in it and never question it, behind closed doors in a room where she obviously forgot there was cameras, she just said everything that everyone else in that room did. And she repeated it, as you've all said. We don't have the surveillance systems. Our trials are not powered enough to understand the safety problem. We know, just like drugs, that even after these little studies are done, that we're going to have to be able to track them through time. Every single scientist in the room said it, and they're all scratching their heads on how they'd be able to do it. Meanwhile, in New Jersey right now, they are fighting for their lives to be able to opt out of a program where idiots are gathered around saying, well, we don't really know or have any ability to know if they're safe, and there really could be systemic problems. As we all know that chronic illness is at a level we've never seen in this country and around the world. How is it anyone can take away your right to exempt out now? Are they lying? Can I use the word lying? Who? Is the WHO lying to you? Let me go out on a limb here. Yes. The World Health Organization, the leading authority of vaccine programs around the world, sponsored and funded by pharmaceutical industries, the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, governments around the world, is lying to the world. Lying to people like Sweeney, who actually believes there's no aborted fetal DNA in vaccines. Lying to every one of your political officials.